start now.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. Welcome members to this meeting of the Shared Regulatory Joint Committee. I'd just like to start the meeting by reminding all participants that this meeting is being recorded and a copy can be, a copy will be archived for future viewing. And also, can all participants mute themselves when not speaking in order to avoid background noise or feedback? And if participants wish to speak, please could you use the hands up icon, and I'll or the chair will bring you in. And if you do have any difficulties hearing or any IT glitches, then please could you contact a member of Democratic Services, and they'll be able to help you. So without further ado, I would like to welcome all committee members and officers and introduce the first item, which is election of chair. So can I get some nominations, please?
Sorry,
No.
Chair, it's a rotation system, so it hands automatically to Cardiff. So that would be Councillor Michael Michaels should be appointed chairman.
Yeah. Do we need to formally move and second that?
Yeah, you can do chair. Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah.
Yeah. So could I get someone?
We do. I'll move it.
Great. Thank you.
No second.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Councillor Michael over to you.
Thank you, Councillor Patel.
Congratulations.
Sorry?
Congratulations.
Thank you, Councillor Patel. So thank you for your year in office. I'm not sure you would have chosen this particular year. Challenging to say the least. So the next item on the agenda is the appointment of a vice chair. I believe it's Eddie's turn this year. So we move on there.
Yep, I formally propose.
I'll
Councillor
second.
William.
Happy to second.
Yeah, I'll second.
Okay, 3 on the agenda is apologies for absence. I haven't received any. Has anyone received any?
No
Nope.
apologies, Chair.
Okay, 4th is the minutes of the meeting held on the 23rd of March 2021. Everyone for those minutes?
Move.
Approved.
Thank you. 5, to receive declarations of interest. Has anyone got any interest to declare in today's meeting? No? Okay, great, thank you. 6 is a joint report from the Director of Environment, Housing and Head of Finance, Section 151 Officer. This is the report of the past year, a difficult and challenging year for Dave and his staff, for which I want to put on record my considerable thanks for the amazing work they're doing. Dave, over to you to give us a report.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Morning, councillors. This is the 6th time I've done this. So the SRS has been in being since 1st of May 2015. This is the 6th annual report that I'm required to create, along with Caris Lord as the Head of Finance, the 151 officer in the Vale. Councillors, the background sets out the legal requirements for writing this report for you. And in paragraph 1.4, I remind you of the way in which the service operates. There are a number of milestones that we needed to tick off. As you know, every year the Wales Audit Office assess our financial performance, given the nature of a joint service. Something we agreed at the very beginning was that we would have an independent financial audit every year of the service. Claire James, our service area accountant, does a fantastic job, along with Lorraine Horton, one of my finance officers, to make sure that once again last year there were no recommendations for improvement. That's a real positive. We set our budget in December 2020, and you were good enough to recommend a standstill budget to the 3 councils. I think we've benefited from that. As Councillor Michael has alluded, it's been an interesting 12 months. We did present our business plan, which we didn't deliver all aspects of, and I'll explain to you why as we go on. And the report that I presented last year had no idea really that COVID was coming in such a magnitude that it did. So the things we set out last year were to look at review recruitment and retention, to look at our agile working arrangements, and to think about new legislation. And at the time, I was thinking about the EU exit. And the EU exit is perhaps something that's passed us by, actually, given everything that's gone on. So if I start with my review of the year, councillors, I would go to paragraph 2.3, and our ability to recruit into the service hasn't been as challenging as the previous 12 months. But what we have done is managed to bring in almost 20 environmental health students in the year. These are people that we've pulled out of the colleges at different stages of the qualification to help us with the coronavirus work and the enforcement work. I flagged that the SRS staff survey undertaken just before coronavirus kicked in shows that people are generally content with working inside the service. A number of people have asked for support to do further professional studies, and we've managed to do that, and we've had a number of successes in the last 12 months. And perhaps a reflection on the dedication of this service at the moment is you'll see sickness absence is one of the lowest it's ever been. It improved significantly from last year, and actually measured against other services in all three councils is a good indicator of attendance. I make the point that our agile working practices and maybe home working has improved that attendance, where perhaps people would have felt they couldn't come in on a particular day, may have been able to work at home with the remote access that they have. I then go on to paragraph 2.6 to talk about some of our operational performance. Excuse my bells in the background. The public accountability measures that we deliver for the councils, there's one there on the broadly compliant for food. And you'll see in paragraph 2.7 that we've had an improvement, but that generally probably doesn't reflect fully the picture of the food establishments in the region at the moment. A number of them were closed for quite considerable time. And we know that as we've gone back to do our inspection programs now through April and May, that in some of those establishments, nature has reclaimed parts of the kitchens. So we are seeing cockroaches, rats, mice, and things that we wouldn't expect to see in kitchens. And so our food teams who are already behind on their inspection programs are finding things a little more challenging again, because they're having to stop and undertake remedial actions, and potentially we could see a series of prosecutions coming forward. So the bad news is, I think when I'll be talking to you about this next time around, is I think those broadly compliant figures are going to drop. But that is just a reflection of what's happening in the industry at the moment. And we have some 1,500 new businesses to visit that have opened or have changed hands during the coronavirus period. Just to give you a feel for the context of that, there are 3,500 new businesses in Wales, 1,500 in the SRS area. The SRS is about 20% of the Welsh population, but we've got 1/3 of the new businesses. So quite a resource challenge for there as we seek to get back to normal. The second public accountability measure we have is on empty homes. That's something we deliver for Cardiff and for Bridgend only. Some good positive work there, bringing a number of properties back into use, and the text is all set out there for you. The normal performance indicators we have are set out at Appendix 1, and read in isolation, you might quite rightly say to me, Dave, what have the officers been doing? So what I've done is also give you an infographic at Appendix 2, which gives you some of the coronavirus related enforcement activities. And through the year, I've been directing you to the SRS website so that you can see what improvement notices have been issued, what closure notices have been issued. And in Bridgend in particular, the local media there have been very keen to use that to push local stories. I just thought, if you would tolerate, I'd just like to show you a couple of slides which sort of are my reflection on the last 12 months, lest we forget some of the things that have happened. So as long as the technology will allow me to share my screen, I am going to try and take you to a brief presentation. So hopefully you can see my screen. Yes, can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can see it.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's great, Dave.
So I just thought I'd take you through very briefly a little bit of a year in the life of the SRS, starting in the March, April of 2020 and finishing in March 21. SARS-CoV-2, that is the name of the virus. COVID-19 is the disease that it generates in humans. And if we go back to March 2020, some unprecedented times where the Prime Minister's ordered us to stay home, and we could only leave home for very limited purposes, and that was to go shopping and the like for essential items. And the shops were empty, the streets were empty, and it was a very strange, uneasy feeling that continued then through into April. The motorways were clear. We saw these signs for essential travel only, and maybe it's easy to forget some of that. Helen's officers very active in chasing down scammers. We saw lots of people exploiting hand sanitizers. Everybody wanted hand sanitizers. You see the one on the left is supposed to be more than 80% alcohol. Turned out to be 48%. And the one on the right was required to have 60%, it had 50%. So what that means was these hand sanitizers were very little use against protecting you against the virus, and yet many of us relied quite heavily on them. We seized hundreds of thousands of face masks that weren't capable of doing what they were supposed to do, and we challenged a number of rogue traders for preying on elderly people. In June, we all started to use new words, and some of those will be familiar to you now, but if I'd flagged those up 12 months ago, you'd have looked at me and think, what does all that mean? But now we know what furlough means, we know what asymptomatic means, and we know what community spread means. And they're all words that have found our way into our regular discourse. In June, we also started to see a little bit of a glimmer of hope with the shops reopening. And whether you remember that 5 mile travel, the rule of thumb, 5 miles in Cardiff, probably translated to 10 miles in the Vale because you needed to travel further in the Western Vale to get to certain places. And importantly for us as a service, Test, Trace and Protect launched in Wales back in June. And we are now celebrating 12 months of that function. Welsh frameworks came into being. The Welsh Government started to try and articulate how we would deal with this going forward. And so we've all had to write prevention and response plans and national plans, local plans and so on. And in August, we all thought things are going quite well. The swimming pools reopened, the gyms reopened, we had Eat Out to help out. And there's a picture there of Cardiff in the August and things seemingly coming back to normal. And then people started coming back from holiday. Bridgend councillors will remember that young lad who decided to travel all the way up the Maesteg, doing a pub crawl, and he'd come back from Zante and he was carrying the virus, and it didn't take long for it to start to permeate into communities. So the response was mandatory face coverings, we had this rule of 6, and suddenly we started to see local restrictions across the council areas, across Merthyr, on the Cunnan Taff Bridge End, but it didn't make a huge deal of difference. And so we ended up with a fire break in October 2020. And those were some of the rules that we were asked to observe. No meetings in households, inside or out. I don't think that many people observed these new requirements as diligently as they might. And then we started to worry about, could we get to Christmas? And you'll see that graph on the left-hand side. The fire break had something of an impact, but it didn't last very long. And the statistics I began to see with colleagues, I'd say that's our darkest hour. Those are the highest infection rates that we'd seen, far higher than the first wave. January 2021, my thought at the time was this was going to dominate our agenda. It didn't. It just passed us by because we were thinking about new lockdown regimes, alert levels 4, 3, 2, 1, and so on. And all this new terminology starts to come in again. And once again, we saw empty streets in February. Businesses closed, a lot of businesses closing permanently because they couldn't stay open and survive what was going on. And as we look back on the impact, you can see those curves, and now we're starting to climb again as we come into June. The Delta variant is starting to bite and have some impact again. The vaccine is the light ahead, I guess. The number of people who've had a first jab is over 2.2 million in Wales. The number of people who've had both jabs is now 1.5 million in Wales. And there's just a small graphic explaining how that vaccine works, and that's become a familiar sign, hasn't it? Vaccination centres on the road signs now are as popular as anything else. So, Chair, that's my very brief presentation, just a reminder, I guess, of where we've been in the last 12 months and where the service has been and what it's been doing. I'll just pause there because there is more detail in the next couple of paragraphs, but I just thought I'd pause there and just see if members wanted to reflect on some of the things I've just said.
Okay, Eddie?
Dave, I thought that was really useful, and I'd like to, I know it's going to go to scrutiny committees, but it's just a good reminder, isn't it, that you're right. If we hadn't had the coronavirus, then we would have been focused everything on Brexit. Just shows, doesn't it? It puts things in perspective, isn't it? And thanks for the reminder of some of the things, particularly the peaks, and they come down to when people haven't complied, and it's fallen through after Christmas. And we're not through it yet, are we? With this, the signs now there's another surge coming through. But no, very useful, and I'd like to probably want this to go back to our, particularly the Vale and the scrutiny committees, just to remind some members all the work. Every time there's a piece, all that legislation, the frameworks, and all that piece, your department and team have had to deal with that, and it doesn't go without saying, we'd be in a much worse place had you and your team, the expertise that you used, hadn't done what you've done. So that's just a recognition of that. Yeah.
Norma?
Yeah, just the same, really. I mean, I think the way you and your team have adapted to the work that needed doing, you still tried to do your day-to-day work where it was there, and certainly, with licensing and things, that I've seen, and the work we've done with the taxis, and then on top of that, dealing with all the changes of legislation just about every week, that you had to cope with. Incredible work, really, and that sheet where you've got the COVID-19 response 2021 is fantastic when you see how much that work there is. And I was wondering if I could be cheeky and ask if you could do that for each of the partners, so that we can have one for Cardiff, that we could promote, really, you know, just to show them exactly how much work has been done. Because I think it's fantastic. Well done to everybody.
Thanks, Paul. For me, I concur with everything Eddie and Norma said. Yesterday I was looking at something on YouTube, was the Jimmy Kimmel show in the USA, and they have a little segment, you know, which was last year in COVID, and it was exactly a year ago is when we were told by the then president that, well, it's obvious we're getting more cases, we're having more testing, and every time you see these things of a year later, right, you wonder the bizarreness of the whole thing, the denial and the stupidity that was going on. And I think what happens is that as things get better, people start to get complacent, their memory tends to shift, and they look forward rather than look back of what happened. So I think it was really useful, Dave, and I share what Norma says, and if we can have this, if we could do a small presentation, I'm happy to make sure it goes to all members of the council, especially this week, because we got council on Thursday, to remind them of how far we've come in the last 12 months. Because I get the feeling that the anticipation there now is, okay, let's just get on with it. Let's move forward. You know, we're all back to normal. You know, Wales are doing fantastic. The Olympics are starting. Look, no one's dying of this stuff anymore. It's okay. And I just think we need a timely reminder. So if we could do something, don't want to put more pressure on you the next few days. I can make sure, and Norma can make sure, every member of our council gets it as a serious reminder of where we are, the risks that are still out there, and the absolutely incredible job that we had to do, SRS had to do from scratch. You know, I was telling Dave yesterday, a few years ago, my bereavement manager was telling us that we needed a new cemetery in Cardiff because we had enough space for several hundred, and his words were, well, look, you know, if something happened, you know, we'd have a problem. And my reply was, well, what could possibly happen? Well, we know what can possibly happen now. And again, I think it's the fact that we never lived through some of the tragedies of the past. We find it difficult to comprehend this type of thing happens. So I think any reminder is useful. Thanks, Dave. Thank all the staff on our behalf, certainly.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Mackie, I can disaggregate those figures, and what I should have said as well, and if I take members to paragraph 2.23, a lot of that work has been done in partnership. So the SRS drives a lot of partnerships to get people to come and buy into what we do. The one is the joint enforcement team with the South Wales Police. There is a typographical error in 2.23. It should say SRS joint enforcement teams. Those are teams of SRS officers and police officers dedicated to going out and challenging during the different lockdown periods people's poor behaviour, and you can see some of the things we've been challenged to do, things like self-isolation, quarantine. Surprising how many people disregarded that advice and those legal requirements, and that's why it was able to seed itself in the community. And in 2.24, I flagged what I think probably is our biggest commitment, and that is to work with the 3 councils, to work with 2 health boards, and we put over 30 people at a time into those SRS test, trace and protect regimes. Primarily our environmental health officers because of their skills with communicable disease. But a lot of their work then flowed into officers that would normally deliver trading standards and licensing duties to do some of the enforcement. So I have flagged much there about coronavirus, but I mean, there are other things been going on. In paragraph 2.27, I talked to you about some of the high-rise building issues, and that's been a particular challenge for Cardiff. And in paragraph 2.28, I've talked about the soon to be coming into being the joint inspection team to look at these different high-rise buildings. There are only 2 in Bridgend that have a potential cause for concern. There are 3 in the Vale that have potential cause for concern. but the Cardiff skyline tells you that there are 60 or 70 in Cardiff that we need to gain some confidence about. So, Chair, that's sort of identified over the 6 years for this committee around safeguarding the vulnerable. And in paragraph 2.30, I highlight a number of the rogue builder prosecutions that we've taken. So our cases in the courts have been interesting in that the courts have said if there are minor offences, they're going to go to the back of the queue. The courts have been very clear they will only deal with the more significant issues. And you'll see that we managed to get 7 cases through the Crown Court at a time where the judges obviously felt that these were significant enough to be heard. And you can see that those chaps ended up with nearly 6 years in custody, 5 years suspended sentences, and a number of financial investigations going on to try and get money back to compensate the victims of those people. And likewise, in terms of safeguarding the vulnerable, all the 3 licensing chairs will know we've put new conditions in for private hire operators and try to improve standards for the travelling public, which is an ongoing challenge. I think as the way in which that industry changes now, booking taxis through apps and the like is very common these days, and we see fewer and fewer people standing at taxi ranks. So I flag those to you as achievements. Again, Chair, I'll pause there on each one of the priorities, if it's all right, just to see if there are any comments on the safeguarding the vulnerable issues. If not, I'll carry on. Okay. Any comments from anyone? Okay, carry on, Dave. Okay. So I then flag our 3rd priority, protecting the environment. I've highlighted there, Chair, the outcome of an animal welfare case. Now, it concluded outside this reporting period, but it began way back in the early part of 2020. So it actually started outside this reporting period and finished outside this reporting period, but took a huge amount of officer time and effort to rescue almost 300 horses from a particular individual. I have shared with you some of the pictures of some of those horses since we've managed to take them into care and look after them and rehome them. And the individual concerned is currently serving time and has lifetime banning orders. Chair, I'm going to pause there because Councillor Thomas has raised his hand. Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Dave. I'd just like to pay tribute to our officers for all the work they've done on this case. I know I gave them a hard time a number of years ago when this was all, well, I don't say when it was all starting because it's been going on for years and years, but I was very worried that this man was getting away with a lot because of his intimidating nature and the fact that he just thought he could get away with anything and bully people. I met with Helen and her team on a number of occasions and was assured that they were doing everything they could. And to the outside world, it didn't look as if we were doing everything we could, but obviously people don't see what's going on behind the scenes. So I'd just like to say a huge thank you to Helen, to pass on to her team, to Dave as well, for all the work they've done on this. It's an excellent result at the end of the day, and hopefully we won't see it arising again when this gentleman does come back from his holiday. It's incredible the work they've done, and really difficult situation with the intimidation and the bullying, which he's absolutely known for and has been for a long time. So yeah, just thanks very much for everything.
Dave? Yeah, Chair, at the bottom of paragraph 2.35, I make the point that, again, the SRS led this, but they couldn't have done it without the police, the RSPCA, and, as Helen reminds me, the South Wales Fire and Rescue Service. It took so long to seize those horses that they had to erect floodlights to allow us to carry on into the evening and into the night to get the job done. These weren't things we could leave behind. We had to get it done and depart. So Councillor Thomas, I'm really pleased you've acknowledged Kellyan's efforts, and I would mention Rebecca Athay and other members of that team as well. Excellent stuff, excellent stuff. Chair, I then go on to pick up air quality, which is a challenge of a different kind in each of the 3 council areas. And I set out some of the things we've done there in Bridgend, Cardiff and the Vale. The 4th priority is about supporting the local economy, and that's been an interesting one in the last 12 to 15 months. Traditionally, what we've done is provide training programs, advise businesses face-to-face on new marketing campaigns and all that type of stuff. And of course, much of that hasn't happened this year. So the advice flow has been about safe opening, has been about risk assessments, all these new legal requirements to have a risk assessment before you open, huge amounts of time going into that. And quite a frustrating challenge, because I think I've said to you before, the advice we give on a Monday could change by Thursday, and the regulations have changed over 70 times since the first set of controls were in place on the 26th of March. It's almost once a week the controls have changed, and it's very difficult for businesses to operate in that climate. And again, some of the work we've done, we have been thanked by the national supermarkets through that March, April, May period for the advice we gave them, because the Welsh controls were different to the English. And so Tesco's, Sainsbury's and the like had to operate under 2 different sets of regimes. Chair, the final priority is about maximising the use of our resources. And again, I talked there about some of our agile work, and in particular, the work that we've done through the SRS website to communicate to people, and use of that website in the most difficult periods tripled through the December period. Our calls to that website tripled above what they'd been the previous year. So that is obviously a good means of communication with clients. So Chair, I'm going to pause there. Having gone through the priorities, the next part of the report is around the financial performance. So I'll pause there and to see if members wanted to ask anything on what I've said.
Committee, anybody have anything to say? Norma?
Yeah, I was just wondering, Dave, what you saw. I know, everything that's going on with the testing and track and tracing. Do you see that continuing for a long time?
Unfortunately, Councillor, I do. The figures in the Cardiff and Vale Health Board area are starting to increase and are starting to reflect what they were as we were coming out of the lockdown controls. So another 40 cases yesterday across Cardiff and the Vale. They are being triggered by carelessness in some instances. So the Vale councillors may be aware that a nursery in the Cowbridge area, a member of staff went in, perhaps it's too strong to say she knew she had the virus, but there was a very high probability she did, went to work for a few days, and it's gone through that nursery quite significantly. Of 139 people who've attended that nursery, children and staff, we now have over 30 of them positive. That nursery provides a lot of wraparound care for 8 schools in the Vale and a few in Bridgend. And it doesn't take long for it to permeate through different families. In Bridgend, we've had a few issues as well. So there are still small sparks, for want of a better description. We haven't got any bonfires yet, but small sparks that are finding their way into the community, that if we don't stop them, and that is the role, as you know, of test, trace and protect, things could get out of hand again. Cwmtaf Morgannwg, we contribute to make sure Bridgend Council is protected as best it can, and much of that is coordinated through Rhondda Cynon as the lead council. But the SRS works closely with them to make sure Bridgend's interests are properly run. Surprisingly so for the Vale. The Vale has never really caught fire in the way that Cardiff and Bridgend have periodically. So do I think it'll carry on? I do. And I think it just is an indication of how contagious that Delta variant is. I try and describe it as, in terms of measuring against the Kent variant, something that's a bit stickier, a bit more magnetic, and therefore more likely to transmit. The vaccine obviously is now in play, but that doesn't stop people contracting the virus, but it will have an impact on hospitalizations and deaths.
Thanks, Steve.
No good news there, Councillor.
No, I didn't think so. I was just, I was thinking more about sort of, it becoming almost, a permanent fixture, and whether, you're going to have to look at, how it's resourced ongoing, really.
So the funding is now committed by Welsh Government to test, trace and protect to the end of March 2022. And I believe the COVID hardship fund will also be available to us for enforcement. But I think Councillor Thomas and I were talking earlier about it will become not much like the flu, I guess. Something we end up living with.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Dave.
Okay, Eddie?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Yeah, Dave, it's just in the past we've seen figures come up in different places, and there's usually a 2 to 3 week sort of surge afterwards. Is that still the case with this, or so we're seeing early signs at the moment? Are you thinking it's going to go up similarly as other variants? Yeah.
So Christina and Jane are in the Cwmtaf Morgannwg steering group right now, and I'm watching some of the messages come up, and things are not all well there. And in Cardiff and the Vale, I meet the public health professionals every day. The perceived wisdom is we are a couple of weeks behind some of the English numbers. And I think Cardiff will incur much of that, because what we're seeing is in the closer conurbations, the cities in England are suffering more than perhaps the regions. And we know that the student population in Cardiff at the moment, that 20 to 29 age group, is far and away the highest prevalence. And unfortunately for Councillor Mackey, in her ward of Cathays, Cathays is, compared to the rest, on fire.
Thanks, Dave. I need to put it in some kind of context. There was a news report this week I was listening to where the report was saying that Liverpool are doing really good. They've managed to get the numbers down to 111 per 100,000. And that really shocked me, as then we were up to 20, and I was getting concerned that we were on the rise from the 10 again that we had last August. And then he wanted to say that Liverpool, in context with other authorities, was was really successful in driving it down, and others were in the hundreds, if not higher. I think, as I said earlier on, memory tends to play funny tricks, and we tend to forget. So when we look at ours and say something like 30, 33 yesterday, well, compared to them, we're doing okay. We're not doing okay, and that's that, I think, is the sort of message you got to keep driving down. That whilst you've been double jabbed doesn't prevent you catching it. You might not be hospitalized, but listen, you do not want to catch this thing. So I can see us living with it. I can see us having booster jabs. I don't think we discussed anything like this when flu happened. We just accepted this was going to happen. We saw the flu jab as a bonus. Yeah, we'll take it, and I think this is what we will be doing here.
So Councillor, in that league table at the moment, as we speak, the Vale is sitting at about 34, Cardiff at about 32, and Bridgend at 21. It wasn't that long ago that Bridgend was in excess of 1,200. So all relative, it's better, and Wales is in a far better position than the other home nations. But that's only because we pursue it so much. So Chair, I've come to the end of my part of the report for a moment. The rest is now set out on financial performance.
Would you like me to come in there, Chair, and I can just update you on the financial position, if that's okay? As Dave said, it's been obviously a very different year for the service, and to some extent that is reflected in the financial position as well. I think the narrative in the report is fairly straightforward and outlines for members the position for the year. If I might, I just wanted to deal with two things really, which is one, our position has changed since we reported to committee back in March, where we were projecting an overspend of about 670,000. And at that time, Dave's service was obviously dealing with that animal welfare issue, and we'd assumed that all of those costs would have to be borne by the service. And also we made assumptions with regards to the level of funding we would get from elsewhere to support the budget during the year. Actually, as you'll see in the report, the provisional outturn position now is that the service overall is 250,000 underspent. And the main reason for the changes is in that we have received money from Welsh Government as a contribution towards the horse seizure costs. Doesn't cover the whole cost, but it does make a contribution to that. Also, we've had funding in, we've been able to recover our costs in relation to the TTP programme, and we've also applied to the Welsh Government for funding both under the hardship grant, so that's for increased expenditure that the services has accrued during the year, but also in relation to lost income. And across those kind of headings, we've received a £1.4 million into the budget, which obviously supported us and put us into the position now of that £250,000 provisional underspend. So I guess I just wanted to reassure members that where we have been able to monies for support, either as a result of COVID or in relation to the animal welfare issue, we have done that. And thanks really to Dave and his staff, particularly on the animal welfare one, for continuing to apply for that grant and successfully having it in the end. That's been a tremendous help in the accounts really. So that is the position on the accounts, which is positive. I would stress these are provisional. These figures now are subject obviously to external audit. And as you'll be aware, what we will do is bring the final audited accounts back to you once we have them. What I was going to ask now was whether or not Gemma Jones could just outline for you briefly some of the key issues in the statement of accounts, which has also been circulated to you as part of these figures for 2021. As there are a couple of issues we'd like you to be aware of, and Chair, we need your signature on these provisional accounts if you're happy with that at the end of this meeting. So if you don't mind, I was just going to revert to Gemma quickly on the statement of accounts.
No problem. Sorry.
Hello, good morning. Just to highlight a few issues on the accounts. So as Carrie's mentioned, these are the draft SRS Joint Committee accounts 2021 that are subject to external audit, which will commence over the next couple of days, and we expect to extend until around September time. Whilst it has been a complex year in many ways, it's been a relatively quiet year from a technical accounting perspective, so there's been no code changes. The key format change I'd highlight in the accounts is that following discussion with external audit last year, and in line with the streamlining agenda, we have taken a number of those minor notes out of the accounts, which hopefully improves their overall readability. There's been no new capital expenditure in the year, and there's been an increase in cash back to usable reserves, which you can see set out in the expenditure and funding analysis on page 14. So the usable reserves now stand at 788,000. We have included a note on the account setting out the COVID-related income which has been received in year. So this includes the track and trace income, the loss of income funding that's been received by Welsh Government, and also the hardship funding. Just to flag up that note, there is a typo there. The health board that covers the Bridgend Council area is Cumtaff, not the Brotaf. So that's as stated in the statement of accounts. So if committee are happy, we will amend that for the final signed version. I just wanted to talk briefly about pensions because there is quite a significant change in the accounts for pensions. The liability for pension stands at 28.8 million as at 31st of March. The detail around that is set out in note 21. So as committee may be aware, we have had for a number of years set aside a £46,000 sum as part of the implementation cost to resolve some issues around pensions data. Having had a discussion with the actuary, I think it was decided that because the issues around needing the split of pension data was largely notional, because it was only really required for the annual accounting cycle. We've been able to do a slightly more cost-effective notional split, but as part of that process, we've carried out a full review of pensions data, and in relationship with Cardiff and Vale Pensions Team and Aon, and we did identify a number of anomalies. So as a result of that, we have got some quite significant shifts in the Joint Committee's share of the pension assets, and also an increase in the pension liability as a result. Going hand in hand with that, we have seen some quite significant remeasurements in year around the pension figures, and that's been reflected across all the various local authority accounts that I've seen. And that's largely been due to an increase in the kind of CPI inflation assumptions, and that's had a knock-on impact on salary assumptions that have been utilised in the actuary's analysis. So following this review, not only have we seen a large increase in the pensions liability, but we took the decision to restate the 1920 accounts to incorporate the impact of these data changes. And the detail of that restatement is set out in note 7. I do want to highlight to committee that under local authority accounting, the impact of these changes is reversed out. So there's no cash impact of these changes. So the liability is offset on the balance sheet by a corresponding unusable pension reserve. And the cash impact will be considered when we do the next triennial valuation as part of the contribution rate. So this is purely from an accounting basis. It's a notional adjustment because it's increases the pension liability, but a corresponding increase in the pension reserve. I did just want to also point out to committee that the comparator balance sheet, which is the first column of the balance sheet on page 17 of the accounts, does need to be amended. It should be as per the 1920 audited accounts, but that change would not impact the 2021 balance sheet or the restated 1920 balance sheet that's included in the accounts. I'm happy to take any questions. Those are the main issues in the statement of accounts.
Thanks very much, Claire. Any comments? No? Okay, thanks very much. Dave, back to you.
Excuse me, Chair. Would you mind if I just drew committee's attention to the annual governance statement, which is at the end of the statement of accounts. It starts at page 56. We are required to put the annual governance statement in as part of our accounts. What you see in front of you is the statement as it stands currently, but this remains a live document. So if anything happens between now and when we finally close these accounts later in the year post-audit, we would have to reflect it and update the governance statement. But what the statement does is it explains the processes and procedures that we have in place to make sure that we're managing our functions effectively. And it looks at the control environment and the risks that the service is managing and ensures that actually they have managed those risks well during the year. I think Dave has already outlined for you how the service has had to change during the year. We've all had to make decisions a lot quicker in order to react to what's been happening. And so internal audit have done a review of the control mechanisms within the service during the last year and have reported a reasonable assurance on those, which I think is positive considering the year that we've been through, and have not flagged up any issues with regards to governance that they feel we need to be aware of or that we need to bring to your attention. So just to bring that to your attention, Chair, we would, if you're all right with that, ask you to sign this at the end of the meeting. again, as I said, remains a live document now until the accounts are formally closed down. And if it changes between now and that time, we will obviously bring any changes to your attention.
Okay, that's great. Thanks very much for that, Karen. Dave knows that if he contacts Ed, my electronic signature is available, so that won't be a problem.
Fine.
Yeah. Okay, Eddie.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Karis, I just wanted to emphasise and Gemma that the fact that we didn't ask any questions wasn't because we're not interested by any stretch of imagination. The report itself was very detailed. And I really appreciate it was done electronically because it gave me a chance to sort of pick some key elements within it, and the fact that you come to this meeting with recognising the needs some minor changes is indicative that you just haven't thrown something together and left it. So really appreciate that, and we've got some real confidence in where you've gone with the finances because of previous audits and whatever. So yeah, I just wanted to emphasise that. Just because we haven't asked the question doesn't mean we're not interested, all right? And also financially, you're right, indicative of the monies that have been called back in through the Welsh Government and through the various initiatives is appreciated, because as a council we will get concerned, particularly with the hundreds of thousands that we're going to be shortfall. So anyway, thanks for that. Sorry, Chair.
Okay, no problem, Ed. Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Okay, Dave.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. I mean, I again would like to go on record and thank Claire James as my service area accountant. The SRS finances are an interesting mix, as you'll see from the annual report, of core functions, authority-specific functions, and much like that. So thanks to Claire and to Karis and all the team that helped me with that. Chair, I'm at paragraph 2.82, which is challenges moving forward. And the bells are going to go off in the background, so hopefully they won't drown me out. The two things I'd flag there are support the partner councils and other agencies to manage the impact of COVID-19. I mean, it was remiss of me earlier. I should have flagged all the work we're doing at the moment in care homes. There are 130 care homes in the region, over 100 schools. Primarily that work is sitting with Sarah Swaysland and her team, who do a terrific job in working with the operators of those closed settings, as we call them, to make sure that the risk assessments are right, to make sure people follow the rules. If it gets into a care home, then the whole home it has to be closed. People can't see their loved ones and so on. So huge amounts of work going on there with directors of education, directors of social services, all that happening. Again, something that committee wouldn't see, but really busy bit of a piece of work there. And then the fourth bullet point is about just understanding how our traditional performance metrics are impacted. We're at the end of Q1 and we're already behind on those traditional metrics because coronavirus continues to pull us into different areas. And as I said earlier, some of the food inspections have not gone well. So I suspect I need to think carefully and work with you to understand how I better report that to you over the next 12 months. But Chair, that's the challenges that I've identified, and then it's back to you for the recommendation.
Okay, thanks, Dave. You've all heard the report from the Joint Report Directors. So the recommendation is to approve. Is everybody happy?
Yes.
Happy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, Chair, can I just interject there? Can we just have a formal recommendation to approve the statement of accounts and the governance statement, please?
Sorry, I didn't hear that, sorry.
Can we have a formal recommendation to approve the statement of accounts and the governance statement from Karis, please?
Yeah, can we have a formal recommendation, please?
I'll move.
Yeah,
Okay.
second.
Second.
Okay, thanks very much. So, paper approved. Okay, so now we move on to the Report Director of Environment and Housing. This is the Shared Regular Report Business Plan for the upcoming year. Dave, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the aspect of work where the business plan looks back at performance. It's all set out for you in the plan, and looking forward to where we think we're going to go in the next 12 months or so. The report sets out again that I'm required to produce this business plan every year under the joint working agreement. The recommendations are that you would consider the plan and approve it, and also then authorise me to make minor amendments should they be necessary through the year. The business plan is linked to all three councils' corporate plans, and you will see common pieces of text in the SRS business plan that are inside each council's corporate plan. I make a point at 1.3, the Wales Audit Office felt that our previous business plans didn't distinguish well enough between statutory duties and discretionary functions. And discretionary functions is an interesting thing because a lot of legislation today gives councils the power to do something, and it is for the council to decide whether to exercise that power or not. But much of what we do is problem solving, and to be frank, I'm not too bothered whether I have a statutory duty to do something or a power to do it. I'm going to go and solve the problem that very often elected members present me. So I feel that distinction would be artificial. That to meet the recommendation, we have tried to make the document a tad clearer on that. But this year's business plan is a much simpler, concise document, bearing in mind what we've been through. It is not over ambitious. It's one that looks to consolidate, reflect on what we've learned, and think about how we do that going forward. It's been the subject of some consultation with Public Health Wales, Police and Crime Commissioner, Food Standards Agency, and they fed back some observations. Each one of those agencies is very keen that we represent their interests fully in our plan. Section 6 of the plan, as I say, looks at some of the achievements and then sets out some of the targets you will monitor us against over the next 12 months. So the plan is there, Chair, for observation, comment. The covering report is a very brief one. It's about understanding if members are happy with what is set out in that plan.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Committee, any comments on the plan, please, the business plan for 21-22? Kashina?
Thanks, Councillor Michael, Chair. I just wanted to put on record actually my thanks to the officers for putting together this plan. I just thought it was really engaging and really easy to read. I particularly liked the case examples that were listed underneath each section. So yeah, just I'm really happy with.
Well, Councillor Patel is happy. I don't know what with, but she's happy. Are you out? Okay, we come back to Councillor Patel later. Norma?
Yeah, just the same, really. I mean, I thought it was really easy to read, very comprehensive, and, you know, in these times to try and plan, to put a business plan for next year is good anyway. And I thought it was really well done. And yeah, good document. Thanks to everybody.
Okay, thank you. Eddie?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I'd just like to say, since last year's crystal ball was rubbish, is this year's going to be any better?
Say nothing's the best. Okay, just to go along with everybody else to say it's an excellent document. We've now had, this is as Dave said, the sixth one, so we know, you know, the start of it, we know the context it comes in. Excellent report, easy to read. And again, I think it's one of those documents that we need to make sure that everybody, certainly in our council, gets a copy of as early as possible. So again, with your permission, I'll arrange to send this to all of the councillors to say this is what we've approved. Read it. Any questions, please come back to me. And I can always come back to the committee, you know, the next meeting. Okay, so thanks for that. Dave, back to you.
Councillor, it is with you to agree the recommendations.
Okay, so can I ask for, again?
Formally move the recommendation.
Second.
Okay, that's great. That's a recommendation of business plan 2020, 21-22 accepted. Thanks for that. Okay, item 8 is any items the chairman has decided urgent. Part 1, there are none. Part 2 is where the public and the press may be excluded for any urgent items. Again, I've had no notifications of those. That brings the meeting to an end. And I thank all the officers, all the staff for the tremendous work they've been doing. Dave, over to you before we close.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I just wanted to come back to you and tell you that the officers in the SRS are hugely grateful for the political support you give. The 6 councillors that serve this committee and some of the other members that attend in your place. The feedback the officers get is good and much appreciated. And running these type of services is I've used the word partnership throughout, and I've always taken the view that officers run services in partnership with members, and it's just been a good 12 months from that respect as well. You've been extremely understanding of the pressures. You've been very supportive in your comments, and I'd just like to send that back at you, as it were.
Thanks, Dave. Listen, you know me, you know what I've always said. I'd be happy for us to be scrutinised by Welsh Government any day of the week, so they can actually understand the way us councils, the way we work together. It's a shared service. It's done, I think, for the betterment of the areas concerned, and we've always been open. We've had discussions with other areas, as you're aware, to see whether they would want to come in or not come in, as the case may be. But I think it's an excellent example of a region getting together to do a specific job and delivering that job. The concerns about X will take over and this will happen and that will happen, none of that is worked out. It's a really good service that delivers, for local government, and I think that's the important thing. And I think Welsh Government wouldn't go far wrong in looking at us as an example for other services that we could possibly do together. That's my personal view. Whether they will or not, who knows? But unless anyone's got any other comments to make, I thank you all for your attendance and see you soon. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye.